Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I am doing well, and we had a great Christmas, and but everybody's resting up. But the partying will continue for a little bit longer because the family keeps coming together.
Nice.
But we had a nice Christmas.
That's great.
And also today we'd like to visit on a subject we have visited before, and it has to do with North Korea. But it's what we have noticed and saw a good report on this in Zero Hedge about what's happening over there now. And this is world government at work, internationalism at work, that they caught the North Koreans trading oil with China. And they had to get that stopped because they didn't want any of this trading business to break out and get out of control. So that was the big thing, and now they'll pretend they're going to stop it, but they're not. But this is ongoing sanctions, and sanctions are, the weapon we use to make people listen to us. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it doesn't work. And under these circumstances here, they have the sanctions. America has sanctions. The UN has sanctions, and China participates in them. And then immediately afterwards, or as it happens, all of a sudden they say, hey, we have evidence that China is selling oil, to North Korea. And surprise, surprise. So what are we going to do now? Now that we have threatened North Korea, I don't think we're going to have a very good time enforcing these rules against China breaking the UN rules. But the whole thing is just to me is a mess. Instead of promoting trade and conversation, we do exactly the opposite. South Korea is not allowed to talk to North Korea, and you certainly aren't allowed to trade because it might help the civilians, and we have to punish the civilians and the kids. Maybe we can get them to overthrow this weird dictator that they have. Mm-hmm. It's been going on for a long time. It usually never works, but nevertheless, it's still there. They're trying to punish one segment of that population. At the same time, it looks like the UN is still involved. That was one of the first projects they had, after they were established in the 1940s, is, I thought it was an atrocious act. The fact that they were the one that instigated the war, got us to go to war for the first time with just a UN resolution rather than a declaration of war. And we've been there ever since. No wonder, that it never ends because it's not a properly declared war. We don't know what the goals will be. But this is just ongoing nonsense. And I see that this is just gives room for escalation, a lot of sharp rhetoric. And Un says that putting on these sanctions is an act of war. I think he's pretty close to being right there. I think if they would do it to us, if anybody did it to us, we'd consider it an act of war. So this is just more mischief and more threats, intimidations, and hopefully someday they'll wake up and decide that there's a better way.
Yeah, in this latest event we saw it, as you say, on Zero Hedge, U.S. spy satellites photographed some 30 illegal transactions where Chinese vessels were selling oil straight to North Korean ships. And so what does it mean? Think about the effects of the sanctions. The new sanctions just passed, new round of sanctions just passed the UN Security Council. The Chinese and Russians foolishly went along with it. I think that's a big mistake, an immoral mistake for them to make. But if North Korean government is as bad as they say, and I'm certainly willing to believe it is, if that's the case, then limiting the resources like fuel and oil, those will all be sequestered over for the military, for the functions of the state. The people who are already having a bad time, as they say, are going to suffer even more. So what does that do? That means people are going to freeze to death. It's cold up there. People are going to have miserable lives. Who are they going to blame? They're not going to blame their leader. They're going to blame the U.S. It's ironic in this situation that this black market selling is really a humanitarian gesture. And who would think everyone who's who criticize the Chinese for the humanitarian and human rights record, they're actually performing a humanitarian task by giving these people the oil that they need to survive the winter.
Right. Un had an interesting comment. He says, we will never give up our nuclear weapons. And I got to thinking, you know, we're not even positive what he has, and he's not likely to be a threat to the United States right now. But it goes to show that if he looks strong, claims he has something that he might not even have, that we're going to be more cautious. But, you know, others who say, well, let's talk and we'll give up our weapons, this sort of thing like has happened in other countries, that just gives license to our side to go in and take over these countries which we devastate. But this is a different scenario in dealing with North Korea, because it's a little bit unpredictable. But from his viewpoint, he's probably acting more rationally than most people want to admit.
And it's not just us saying that he probably isn't a threat. James Madison, the Secretary of Defense, said they're not really a threat. These missiles aren't really a threat to us at this point. So it's not just us saying this. But the fact is, okay, if they have nuclear weapons, it would be nice if they gave them up. It would be nice if we gave ours up, if everyone gave them up. But if that's really what the goal is, then what we're doing has the opposite effect. It makes them want it more because they feel threatened. So if you truly wanted him to give up his program, you would encourage the North and South to have rapprochement, to get back to a normal situation. You stop having military exercises on the border where the goal is decapitation of the regime. So if our goals really were what they say they were, we'd be doing the opposite of what we're doing.
You know, this whole argument that we have to stop them because they are bad people and they're going to do such and such, but when you say what crime have they committed? Have the North Koreans committed aggression? That should be a good test. You know, if they've done some aggression, you know, it would be a different conversation. But we are a country that we're involved in over 100. Sometimes people put up 150, but significantly so, quite a few countries that we have our military in, and that we are de facto the controllers of the country. So this is aggression, and look at how many wars we have been in, going into wars 6,000, 7,000 miles from our home and killing a lot of people. Korea has not committed any aggression, and yet we're over there preaching to them and demanding that they listen to us. And if not, we're going to do many more things to them and threaten them with, you know, with violence, and that we will bomb them and do whatever's necessary. You better watch out, because they believe in a first strike.
And unfortunately, you know, with the mainstream media pumping in the propaganda constantly, a lot of, well, probably not our viewers, because our viewers are more astute than that, but probably a lot of people would say, how dare you say they're not aggressing, they're not committing aggression? Don't you know they're terrible? Well, that's aside. Maybe it's not the kind of government we want. They test weapons? Yeah, they do. But so do we, so does other countries. Would it be better if they didn't? Probably Japan would feel more comfortable if they didn't. However, as you say, they're not invading other countries. They're not doing regime change overseas. They're not sponsoring the overthrow of the government in Ukraine. They're not sending weapons to jihadists in Syria. So in that sense, they're not committing aggression.
In the United States has made a request. I imagine it's to United Nations. I don't know why they make requests once in a while and the other times they don't. But they made a request where they can intercept and board any ship on the high seas that they suspect might be trading with North Korea. Isn't that Pandora's box? I mean, the high seas, big place, a lot of ships, and they may be trading things off 300 miles or 1,000 miles offshore, who knows what. But that's the kind of thing that they want to do, and that's expansion. And it's not going to all of a sudden say to the North Koreans, oh boy, we have to stop doing this. We better obey them, because otherwise they're going to stop our ships, you know, and they're going to prevent this from happening. But just one thing leads to another, and they actually, our side, our leaders actually believe this type of conversation is worthwhile, that it's moving in a direction that will be beneficial to the American people and to national security and to peace of the world. Maybe they're not as interested in peace in the world, and maybe they have a different definition of what national security is all about and national interest. Quite frankly, when they talk about national interest, I sort of cringe, because national interest usually means occupation and telling other people what to do.
Yeah, I think this is really where it could get interesting because, okay, you've got these spy satellite photos, obviously meant to provide evidence. That evidence will be used to bolster what we heard floating around a week and a half or so ago, that the U.S. wants to start boarding ships, starts to enforce a blockade against North Korea. If that's the case, this is a neocon escalation. This is how they do it, as you know. If that's the case, it'll be interesting to see what happens the first time an American naval ship decides to board a Chinese flagged ship.
You know, the UN resolutions came in September, but the new ones from Trump came in September as well. It was right after that that they started this trading. And it very clearly, you know, it was a reaction to Trump. It's a challenge to Trump. And I don't know what he'll do, you know, because he speaks tough, but he's the kind that you think won't back down, but sometimes he does. So, but I think the Chinese and the North Koreans are sort of playing, you know, with Trump because he's the one that's pushing these sanctions, and yet North Korea's in defiance. They're not going to go along with this. They're not going to capitulate. We know that, and they must know it too. They might just sort of like it. Maybe they have to build more weapons, you know, and spend more money. And you know, this is an ongoing problem.
But I think there is a bright spot, and I know this might be shocking to some, but it doesn't come from U.S. diplomacy or saber rattling. As we saw, actually, it was on Anti-War Today, South Korea's unification ministry issued a very upbeat report looking toward onward to 2018 with regard to relations with North Korea. And this ministry, which is the job is to reunification of two countries, they expect North Korea to enter into direct talks with the U.S. in 2018. If that's the case, that's very good news, and they should be in a pretty good position to know if that indeed will happen. So that is a bit of brightness. I would just say to that really is the potential solution. I don't think that the U.S. is going to let that happen without some pressure from South Korea. Listen, guys, we've got to go a different route on this. If they can hold strong on some of this pressure, it could be a very good outcome.
See, the argument against that from many American people and many of the conservatives and the neocons, at least they'll use it, and they'll say, well, you're just giving up South Korea, North Korea will take over, and it's going to be a communist nation, and you just don't want to capitulate like that. But all I do is think about what happened in the 60s after millions of lives were killed and the French failed in Vietnam and we failed and lost so many people. And it was always a worry, well, if the communists get to win, you know, there'll be the domino effect. They're going to take over not only Vietnam, but they're going to take over all the Middle East and the Far East. And yet exactly the opposite happened. You know, the two factions came together. As soon as we got our way, yeah, it looked like a tremendous total victory for communism. But guess what? You know, reality set in, and they decided they'd pick up a few Western values. And since that time, you know, we've had the total failure of the Soviet type of system of communism. And actually, you know, they say, well, when they talk about China, they say, well, why are they doing this and that? Aren't they a communist? Well, yeah, they call them they're communists in a certain way, but they're pretty good capitalists too. They're doing pretty well. They make stuff and sell it, and they have good markets, and they have money in the bank, and they're investing it more wisely than we are. We invested only in the promotion of our troops in the various countries to have an influence rather than in the marketplace. So they shouldn't be frightened of freedom. They shouldn't be frightened of conversation. That if you are on anywhere, you know, equal grounds, or just have the opportunity to expose our ideas, you know, and that was the fault in Cuba. We had those sanctions all the time, and you know, it solidified Castro's support, and it took so much longer. It's just barely breaking loose now, but it could end. I think the Vietnam experience is a very good demonstration of let the Vietnamese, let the Koreans solve their problems, let them talk, and things would be much better.
Yeah, and we'll be there to reap the benefits if they get along. If I can just use my closing time to once again remind our viewers, if you like the Ron Paul Liberty Report, if you follow what we do at the Ron Paul Institute, it's a great opportunity this week. It's the last week before the end of the year. You can make a tax-deductible donation. We're a 501c3 before the end of December. get your tax benefits for the year, keep a little bit of your money out of Uncle Sam's pocket, and send it to a good cause. We're building a left-right coalition to oppose our internationalist, interventionist foreign policy and to promote civil liberties at home. And we're having a lot of success. We can't do it without you, so please, ronpaulinstitute.org/support if you can help us out before the end of the year. And thank you so much for watching us and supporting us.
I want to thank our viewers today for tuning in. We appreciate that. But just with a closing comment, I would like to refresh everybody's memory that over the many, many years, I have never been a fan of the United Nations. And as I earlier stated, that it was the UN that really got us on the wrong direction about getting involved in Korea in the first place. And right now it's the UN. They're perpetuating this problem. They're the ones that we go to and other countries go to get sanctions put on and prevent the negotiations that should happen. And it's just like the WTO, part of the international world government. It's designed, they say, for free trade and lower tariffs, and yet it's nothing more than a place where the big guys get to put sanctions on other businesses and have regulated trades. So internationalism is bad. That was one thing I was hoping for, that Trump would be more determined on not supporting these international organizations. And the rhetoric is good, but still, if they're on his side and they can use them, then they end up being a partner in pursuing the policy that he wants. So I think internationalism is bad. I don't think the UN is going to solve these problems. This is another example of their failures. I think that a country that is strong and willing to defend itself, but willing to talk with others and not be frightened and intimidated by peace breaking out, would be all a lot better off. But right now we continue with this mess, started way back shortly after World War II, and it's ongoing, and it looks like, it's not going to fade away. Daniel mentioned the fact that there could be some talks coming up. I think that would be a breakthrough and helpful. But as long as it's back and forth and putting on sanctions that punish innocent civilians, it's not going to solve the problem. Only a sensible foreign policy of non-interventionism will solve the problem for us. That will truly provide and protect our national security interests, and it would promote peace and prosperity throughout the world. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.